A big week in politics with President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address coming on Thursday. Now, it will set the tone for the coming year and offer some clarity on plans to rebuild the economy battered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the president is also likely to report back on the progress his government has made on the promises he made in his last address. Let's unpack it for you now. Judith February is an author and also visiting fellow at Wits University's School of Governance. She joins us now for some analysis. Judith, great to have you with us here on the show. And what a week to be delivering the State of the Nation address, hot on the heels of last night's, some would say, devastating information emerging about our vaccine rollout plan.
Good morning, Michelle. Yes, it's a big week in South African politics. And I think that some of what we've seen around the vaccine rollout has been very patchy. And there hasn't really been that much information available. What the president has done is he has bandied around quite a lot of numbers. We know we got 1 million doses last week, and now we sit with this challenge. I think we do need to hear from the health minister about this and see, what the way forward is. I mean, there are many issues around the vaccines for different variants and so on. And so I think a lot of this is also a moving target. But it comes at a time when, we've had a year of lockdown virtually. We've had economic serious challenges in our economy, people losing their jobs, and just a sort of sense within the country that things are stalling and we feel paralyzed by our own inability to score own goals and just our inability to move forward. And so it impacts the psyche of the country, I think, when we read stories like that about the vaccine and so on. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, how do we even begin to start to think about what the president will have to say this week? If we, normally how we do this kind of analysis is we'll look at his last address, and the big takeaway from SONA 2020 was the issue of our growing unemployment numbers in the country. Fast forward 1 year, those numbers have now increased exponentially. How do we look at it in the lens of a pandemic, Judith?
That's a good question, Michelle, because I think we have to, this year's State of the Nation address will, some might say mercifully, look very different. We won't have the sort of absurd fashion parades that we see and some of the pomp and ceremony, which one can sort of park to the side, really. And it will be appropriately pared down because we are in a time of global crisis and in a time of South African crisis. Apart from the people who've lost their jobs, Michelle, there are stories about the most vulnerable in our society who are having to queue up for social grants, a state which seems at a loss to know how to deal with the most vulnerable, and also a state which is incapacitated. The president is going to have to come to Parliament and talk about his economic reconstruction and renewal plan, which was passed in October, but which we saw last week, the Mbeki Foundation criticized it for not being transformative enough. And it seems as if we need to have some report back on that progress, even though it seems as if that it really hasn't got out the starting blocks, apart from some of those sort of youth employment schemes and so on. And really, the country is crying out for action, for assistance in this regard, and for concrete action from what seems to be just a completely incapable state, incapable of rolling out anything, even in the most basic manner.
Well, talking about getting out of the starting blocks, some of the other big announcements that the president made in his State of the Nation address last year was that he would finally be dealing with his bloated cabinet. And part of that would be in the form of performance appraisals for his minister. That didn't happen.
It didn't. And Michelle, I think what the pandemic has also laid bare is it's laid bare the weakness within President Ramaphosa's cabinet. You have individuals like Stella Ndabeni-Abrams, who is fighting with the SABC board and who has disgraced herself during lockdown. Somebody like Lindiwe Zulu, who is presiding over a disaster with regard to the rolling out of social grants, and also breached lockdown regulations. She was seen shopping during hard lockdown without sort of worrying about the optics of that. So you have, and these are only two individuals. We've got crises at the border with regard to the Department of Home Affairs also being unable to deliver. And yet these individuals survive because we know that the president needs these individuals for his political future. And we also know that there's tremendous pressure on him as he comes to Parliament on Thursday, because he's facing not only headwinds from citizens and from the economy, but also from within his party. So, the crown sits uneasily on the head.
Yeah. I mean, if we think about, the challenges that the president faces as president of the ANC as well, and how that, as you're saying, how that's translating into the work of the presidency, have we heard enough from President Cyril Ramaphosa around some of the key issues that have been unfolding? For example, let's say at the state capture inquiry, around former President Jacob Zuma, around the Secretary General of the ANC, essentially the CEO of the party, talking about, not worrying too much about something like the Constitution.
Yes. Well, I've written a piece today in the Daily Maverick, which says that the president really needs to talk about this. And so for me, Michelle, the State of the Nation address has got to be about COVID-19 and about the impacts on our economy. Vaccine rollout plan, we need clarity on that, not just banding around numbers. And the second issue is about the rule of law, and it's about whether the president is going to take a strong enough stand about what the former president and the Secretary General of the ANC has said about ignoring the Constitutional Court. The very point about the supremacy of the Constitution is that it applies to us all, no matter how powerful, no matter how weak. That is the point of living in a constitutional democracy. If certain senior members of the ANC cannot accept that, that is a huge problem. It's an assault on our democracy. And the comments that the president made in Soweto on Friday, saying that former President Zuma has been counseled about his approach to the rule of law, that sort of mealy-mouthed comment is simply not good enough. We must not underestimate the moment that we're in. We are living through a time of a global pandemic, social and economic crises. And this is a moment where we've seen in other places around the world, populists arise because they feed to people's base instincts. And the only guardrail we have is the Constitution and the rule of law. So the president, I think, as he comes to Parliament, which is a constitutional obligation, he needs to talk to us, the people, and say that he is serious as one of the architects of this democracy and this constitution. He is serious about protecting and defending the Constitution. That is, after all, the oath he took.
Less talk, more action, Judith. Whenever you and I talk in the run-up to the State of the Nation address, that certainly is the theme that comes out. You can say the right things, but we want to see more action, Mr. President. What are our hopes for this year?
Well, Michelle, it seems as if we need to just get some of the basics right. And for example, the issues around digital spectrum, there's meant to be a digital spectrum auction. That hasn't happened. There's been some movement with regard to renewable energy and adding that to the grid, but you've got a Minister of Mineral Resources dragging his feet in some way. Can we get it right to deliver grants to people so that you don't have people sitting outside in the hot sun, not socially distant, risking their health to get a paltry amount of money? And can we deal more decisively with corruption? And for me, that means that the president needs to deal with those, around him and how he deals with that with regard to if there are allegations of corruption. We've got a spokesperson who's been suspended for what feels like the better part of a year. Around PPE corruption, what does it say about our society that people are prepared to go to such lengths to literally steal from citizens at their most vulnerable? It says something about the soul of the country. But Michelle, I think a lot of this, we can sort of have these conversations, but I think a lot of this obviously has to do with the capacity of the state. And I think that President Ramaphosa seriously underestimated the lack of capacity within the state when he took over with great promises of Tuma Mina. We need him to succeed. But the legacy of Jacob Zuma and the legacy of that kleptocratic presidency and the constitutional vandalism is a state which has been hollowed out, institutions which are not fit for purpose, and the brightest and the best who were there, who fled that administration. And that you can't fix within 3 years. And that is the massive problem we sit with at the moment as we have a congealing of all these factors of crisis, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Big week politically for the president, for our country as well. Judith February, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your time this morning
Michelle.
on the AM Report.